The Secrets of the Great Pyramid. Birth of the Pyramid. Part 1. Of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, only the pyramids still stand. Virtually nothing remains of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, of the Colossus of Rhodes only an occasional fragment turns up in a fisherman's net, and non-historians would find it difficult to even name the remaining 4: the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the lighthouse at Alexandria, and the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. Each year the pyramids are visited by millions of tourists who stare in wonder at the achievement of ancient man. When you stand in front of the Great Pyramid you can almost feel its massive weight. 107 pyramids are scattered throughout Egypt, but the pyramids on the Giza Plateau are the famous ones. They are the largest, best preserved, and most visited of all the pyramids. The Great Pyramid is a few feet taller than the one next to it, but because of its unique maze of internal rooms and passages, it is the one with all the legends. The pyramid's entrance remained unknown until the 9th century when the Caliph Al-Ma'mun tunneled deep into its core and hit a passageway. By torchlight his men followed the passageway upward until they discovered the Queen's Chamber, a small rectangular room with 22 huge limestone rafters forming the ceiling. To their disappointment, the room was empty, but still in search of treasure, they continued upward through the grand gallery to the king's chamber, where they found only an empty sarcophagus. All the treasure had been carried off centuries before. Still, the adventures of Al-Ma'mun's band of would-be tomb robbers became one of the 1001 tales in the Arabian Nights, that says Al-Ma'mun found weapons of metal that would not rust and glass that would not break. Modern science has studied, mapped, and photographed the Great Pyramid more than any other pyramid, yet it still harbors mysteries. There are rooms whose purposes are unknown, and only recently a robotic camera sent up the air shafts in the Queen's Chamber discovered tiny doors with copper handles. What lies behind these doors is still unknown. Of all these mysteries, the biggest is how the Great Pyramid was built. The Egyptians were a nation of accountants. They recorded everything: how many of the enemy they killed in battle, the names of the pharaoh's children, even cake recipes. We have medical papyri, short stories, laundry lists, reports of expeditions, but not a single document recording how the pyramids were built. We know the names of the 2 horses that pulled Ramses the Great's chariot at the Battle of Kut, Mutis Content and Victory in Thebes, but I can't tell you how the Egyptians hauled those huge blocks up the Great Pyramid or how many men worked on the pyramid at any one time. The ancient Egyptian records are silent when it comes to the greatest building project in the history of man. Because of this, wild theories have always abounded. When Menachem Begin, Israel's prime minister, visited the pyramids, he proudly proclaimed that his ancestors built them. The prime minister had bought into one of the many pyramid myths. When Begin's ancestors were in bondage in Egypt, the pyramids were already ancient. The Old Testament never mentions the pyramids. It does, however, say that the Israelites built the store cities of Ramses and Pithom, which places the Israelites' sojourn in Egypt during the reign of Ramses the Great 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built. Hebrew slaves hauling blocks is pure Hollywood. The pyramids were built by free labor, Egyptian construction workers who were paid for their services, but slaves building the pyramid isn't the only biblical nonsense connected with the pyramid. There's a story in the Bible that has nothing to do with the pyramids, but in the 18th century somehow it was linked to them. Remember the biblical story of Joseph and how he interprets the Pharaoh's dream of 7 lean cows devouring 7 fat cows. Joseph explains that there will be 7 prosperous years for Egypt, but they will be followed by 7 years of famine. Based on Joseph's dream interpretation, grain is stored during the prosperous years, so Egypt will not starve during the lean years. Where was all that grain stored? You guessed it, in the Great Pyramid. One of the earliest theories of the function of the pyramids was that they were Joseph's granaries. There are so many things fundamentally wrong with this theory that it could only have been invented by someone who had never seen the pyramids. Think about it. The pyramid would have to have been built in less than 7 years in order to store the grain for the lean years. It might be argued that the pyramids were built as granaries before Joseph arrived on the scene. That they were always Egypt's way of storing grain. But we still have the problem of where to put the grain inside the pyramid. It's mostly solid. Even if the few interior rooms inside the pyramid were used to store the grain, that would entail it being carried through narrow, dark passages over slippery inclines and up to a great height, inside the pyramid. No, whoever first concocted the Joseph's granary theory, never saw the pyramids. Prior to the 18th century, you could get away with this kind of theory because practically no one outside of Egypt had seen the pyramids. Most of the early published illustrations of the Giza pyramids were drawn by artists who had heard about them, but certainly not seen them. They had been told that they were on a plateau, and were pointy, so they drew what they thought they looked like. Often they were too steep, and too numerous. Finally, in the 17th century, when adventurous travelers began visiting Egypt, the theories about the Great Pyramid began to be based on observation, but that still didn't mean they were sensible.